Welcome to another amazing guest episode of You Make It Happen. We have Liz Shuler on. She's a psychedelic healer. She's a yoga therapist. She has her doctorate in psychology. She is just all the things, and she's done so much work on herself. This is such an exciting episode. Maybe it's just me, but I was super curious to learn about psychedelics and how they can assist with trauma healing. Because as I've talked about in multiple episodes, there's so many different mediums for trauma healing. Even if taking psychedelics doesn't appeal to you, the information in this episode is just so good. And Liz is brilliant. As always, I want to thank everybody for the feedback, and sharing it with your friends, family, whoever is the biggest compliment. Stay tuned for the episode with Liz coming at you. Okay, thank you so much for being here, Liz, on the You Make It Happen podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And I'm so excited for our listeners to hear about your story and about what you do. And also, can you tell us a little bit about that, a little bit about what a psychedelic integration healer and yoga therapist is for those who aren't necessarily aware?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really like to geek out about this stuff, so it's nice to have somebody who will listen to me who isn't my partner who's long suffering with all of this.
Yes.
And yeah, a psychedelic integration healer to me is somebody who uses psychedelics to help people heal. I don't always like give the psychedelics or facilitate the psychedelics. I more work on the before and the after, which to
Okay.
me is integration, but a lot of people call it preparation and integration. I think they're the same thing.
Sure.
And that's where kind of yoga therapy comes in. A yoga therapist is just somebody who is a yoga teacher who has taken extra training and extra certifications to be able to treat physical and mental health disorders through the science of yoga, a little bit of Ayurveda as well.
Okay.
So I meld those two together, and I'm able to use the psychedelics with the yoga, and the yoga helps integrate the psychedelics and helps people have really long lasting healing benefits from the psychedelics.
That's fantastic. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background in education, since it sounds like you've gone through a lot to get to where you're at? I mean, all kinds of certifications and stuff.
Yeah, so I was a therapist for about 10 years and worked in the mental health field before that. And it was always something that I was interested in. I always had a little bit of the woo-woo in me and, the tarot cards and, things like that. So
I love tarot
I,
cards.
yeah, they're beautiful. I've got a couple of decks behind me right now. But I really wanted to help heal people,
Yeah.
partially because I was looking for ways to heal myself, right?
Yes.
And when
Yes.
I went into my undergrad in psychology and then my master's degree, a lot of that, I guess, woo woo. I mean, that has a connotation to it, but for me, it's a positive thing now.
Yeah.
But in academia, in, these science-based medical model places, that was really looked down upon.
Yeah.
And there was even one professor who was like, would talk to us about grief and the other side and talking to people on the other side and all of the research that is you can find on these things. And
Right.
she was the subject of like complaints from students and her
Oh,
colleagues looked
wow.
down on her. So it was very much instilled in me like these two things don't mix. It's like the science and then there's the woo woo and the woo woo stays away from your professional stuff, right? The only
Wow.
thing that really got to stay was the yoga because there's so much research on yoga as a trauma treatment that they couldn't like tell
Ignore
us that
that.
that was not real. Yeah,
That's too woo-woo too. You're like, no, that's legit. Thank you.
exactly. Yeah. So I did a bunch of yoga. I ended up doing my yoga teacher training right at the end of my master's degree. And then I ended up doing basically an apprenticeship with a somatic experiencing practitioner for 2 years after my master's degree while I was getting licensed. And then I moved abroad and things kind of got a little bit crazy. I started working in international schools. And then when we moved to China, COVID hit 4 months after we
Oh,
moved.
oh, wow.
Yes. So I was like, well, I'm going to be doing a lot of like virtual school and a lot of staying home. I might as well, do my PsyD.
Yeah.
And when I went into my PsyD, I was able to take a lot of electives with like mind body therapies and somatics and
Can you just clarify for our listeners what a PsyD is?
Yeah, it's like a doctorate in clinical psychology. So it's not a PhD, but it is a doctorate.
Yes.
Just more clinical, less research. But yeah, I was able to do a lot more of the woo-woo in my PsyD
I
than I
love the
was.
woo-woo.
Yes, I know it's beautiful and it's amazing and it's powerful. So I kind of delved into it and I ended up doing my thesis on psychedelic assisted therapy. And I'm not a stranger to psychedelics. My dad was a hippie, is still a hippie, did a lot of
Love it.
drugs, was really open with me about what that was like and how powerful psychedelics can be. But again, that was all
Absolutely.
just pushed down, right, by the academia. Like you can't do that professionally and legally
Right.
and all of these things. So when I was able to do the research on psychedelic assisted therapy, it kind of re-sparked in me that woo-woo and that realization that all of these things that I had been told are not helpful because they're not evidence-based are actually
Right.
very, very helpful.
And there actually
And
is a lot more evidence that's coming to light now that they are evidence-based. It's just not
exactly.
taught. It's just not taught because I don't know. I think we would have to go back to the war on drugs in the US in the 80s and how every single drug was just criminalized and stigmatized as it's the devil's poison and or whatever, which is just
Mhm.
ridiculous because some of them are so helpful. Like for somatic healing, for experiencing like psychedelics, let's like the entire category.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah.
continue.
And so I decided that I was going to let go of my clinical licensure and let go of all of that baggage that was kind of keeping me boxed in a place that wasn't really me
Yeah,
and just start doing psychedelic healing and somatic coaching and mind body stuff.
I love that. I love that. And I know you mentioned like also wanting to do this for you. You obviously have gotten started on your own healing path since it takes a ton of personal work to get where you're at today. Can you tell us like how you got started on that? Like what made you want to go down that path?
Yeah, thank you. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of luck and it takes a lot of help.
It does, yes.
Yeah, so I think it really started. I'm not going to go into any detail, so no trigger warnings or anything, but I have a lot of complex trauma from my childhood.
Sure.
And that was also manifesting in a lot of physical issues that I didn't, you don't make the connection, especially when you're,
Oh
a
no.
kid, right? Yeah, you don't
Yeah,
make that
you don't
connection. It's just
know.
like, I'm sick all the time,
Yes, I
right?
was sick all the time as a child and I didn't understand and my parents didn't understand. The fuck's
Uh-huh.
wrong with our kid? She's just
Yeah,
broken. I'm like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
apparently.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Thank you for saying that.
no problem. Yeah, it's one of those again, it's one of those woo-woo things. We've separated the mind from the body so much that
Right.
it's just like, no, these are separate things. And
Right.
we're
But
going to try and figure out this thing, but you need to know about this other thing first.
exactly. And in the knowledge and the science has been there for so long that the body and
Mhm.
the mind are connected to the nth degree, to the fact that like, you're making yourself sick, not intentionally, but because of whatever you're going through. That's making you sick. Not you're making yourself sick. This psychological stress or this or whatever is making you sick or giving you
Yeah.
fucking cancer. Like, I mean, you
Yeah.
can die from this.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that's
Yeah.
another reason why psychedelics and a lot of these other, alternative, whatever healing stuff came up for me because I was looking into a lot of the autoimmune stuff. And,
Right.
traditional tribes, indigenous peoples have known this for fucking ever. I mean, they've been
For
using
fucking ever.
psychedelics. Yeah,
Yes.
that's why they
Thank
use
you.
psychedelics,
Exactly,
right?
because they're like, oh, we know how to heal. We'll just take our, magic substances, which are naturally occurring in the ground or
Mhm.
whatever. We're not going and hunting down, MDMA, which I heard is also helpful as a,
Yep.
for a substance. But I mean, the tribes and the traditionals will take the stuff that grows in the ground, right? And take
Yep.
stuff that they can find or make their, poultice or whatever. Was that what it's called?
Hmm.
Poultice? Yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, I think I'm using that word right. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
No, no
I'm also
problem.
geeking out about this stuff.
Oh, it's great. I love it. So I was having all these physical symptoms, and then I had an accident where I ended up with a really, really bad concussion. And I got bad back pain from that, probably a little bit of whiplash, but there may be some sort of connective tissue issue that I have. And so
Yeah.
I found yoga at age 16 because I was going to chiropractors and I was taking pain medication all the time. And
Yeah.
yeah, And it was horrendous because I was going to school and I was sitting in those really uncomfortable chairs, and then my back would pop out and I'd just be in pain, or my arm would be numb, and it's hard to pay attention. And I did that for, yeah, I think the accident happened when I was 11. And so until I was 16, I was taking probably 400 to 600 milligrams of ibuprofen a day.
So you're miserable, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I was just looking around one day, and my friend was like, "Hey, I've got this like yoga video," and it's like a VHS. So
Yeah,
back
of
then it was a
course.
VHS.
Yes.
I
That's
was
what
like,
I was
"Okay,
watching at 16.
yeah, okay, I'll try it. I'll see what it's about." And it's just this like really simple beginner's yoga.
Hmm.
And after I think it was like a 60-minute yoga practice, my back didn't hurt for the first time in like 5 years.
Oh,
Right.
wow. Because do you think it's because of the mind-body connection that you made?
I think it is probably in that moment. I think it was because I was using muscles that I hadn't used in 4 years because it hurt so
Oh,
much.
right.
Right. And then, so I kept doing the yoga. And what I didn't realize, because I was doing it for the pain, what I didn't
Right.
realize is that my yoga practice was helping me deal with the trauma that I was still going through at age 16.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
It does.
And
Yeah.
then as I went through my yoga practice, I've been doing it for, 20 years now. When I went into my master's degree, we had to talk about like, why do you want to be a counselor? And part of it was my trauma. And I had to be really raw and vulnerable. I was like,
Oh,
shit, I don't know that
gosh.
I'm going to be able to do this. And I went into the classroom and I did it. And like, I mean, I was a little bit explicit,
Yeah. No, I
more than
understand.
I expected I would be. And like I cried, but it wasn't that heavy, like shame-filled darkness that it had always been before. I was like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is going on? Why
Yeah.
is this easier than I thought it was going to be? And I eventually realized it's because I've been doing yoga for, at that
Yes.
point, 14, 15 years. And so I've been doing mindfulness, I've been doing breath work, I've been taking Ayurvedic herbs,
Oh, I
right?
love that.
I've been doing all of this as part of my yoga practice, and it has slowly, over time, helped me move through and resolve a lot of these things.
Yes. Yes. Yoga
Yeah.
is magic. I love yoga.
Magic.
It's one of the things that I started in 2020, and I can't remember if I've mentioned this to my listeners because all my episodes run together in my head. Because I'm like, well, I've recorded this many, but I've released this many. Anyway, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but yoga is one of the things that I highly recommend as an alternative a medium to healing,
Yeah.
because it's the best exercise recommended for mental health. I mean,
Yes.
period. And it really is. It really can, if you use it and if you connect and if you pay attention and connect to your body and connect to your breath, you'll
Yep.
also connect to your spirit. And
Yes.
it's just there's so much more to yoga than just, breath work and stretching and fitting into the pigeon shape. I mean, there's just so much more,
Yeah.
which is a difficult one.
The asana, the poses are just the vehicle to get you into that mind body connection and that connection with yourself
Exactly.
and the divine, really.
Exactly. Exactly. And I became so much more spiritual and connected after I started doing yoga. And it was recommended by the trauma therapist who I was doing EMDR with. And he's like, you need to start doing yoga. And I was like, all right, I need to get off my ass, is what you're saying. He's like, no, 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 no. You need to start doing yoga for the mind body connection. I was like, oh, I don't just need to get off my ass, is what you're saying. And he's like, yes, pretty much. He's like, but
Yeah.
getting off your ass is good for you too.
Yeah, I mean, the yoga that I go to most actually is yin yoga, which isn't gonna like up your heart rate or, do
Right. It's
anything for you.
slow.
Yeah, it's very slow. And I mean, for a lot of people, I think it's the hardest yoga to do because you're sitting in a pose for 5 minutes
Oh,
and you're
it's
just
so
with
hard.
yourself, right?
Well, and some of if you sit in some of these poses, they will make you sweat. Like, I mean, yin yoga can be pretty hard. I've attended a yin class before, and I was like, whoa, this is hard,
Yep.
but so healing, so good. Tell us how psychedelic integration can help anybody heal.
I want to do a caveat. I think that psychedelics can be for everybody. I don't know that psychedelics are for everybody.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And yeah, the reason is that there are a lot of contraindications. Now, the medical model puts in a lot more contraindications than I think are necessary for
Okay.
psychedelics. A lot of people will say, if you have any sort of severe mental illness, don't use psilocybin. I don't know
Okay.
that that's necessarily true. They're using psilocybin to treat mental illness. So why would that be a contraindication?
Yeah, I
Right?
agree.
However, there are some contraindications that I think are really important. If you have a family history or a personal history of psychosis, that could be dangerous, right? That could create more psychosis for you. On the other
Yes,
hand, there's research showing that it could be helpful. So that's a risk benefit thing that you have to take into account.
right.
And things like with MDMA, you need to make sure that you don't have any cardiac issues or blood pressure issues
Does it
because that could
increase
be,
your heart rate?
it increases your heart rate, it
It
increases your
does.
blood pressure, and it can, a lot of people when we talk about, MDMA is dangerous, it's because people are at raves and they've taken MDMA and they
Right.
overheat because it just
Yes.
heats you up, right?
Okay.
So it's those sorts of things that you really need to be careful with and make sure that you have a person who can help you figure out what those contraindications are. And then you need to make that risk benefit analysis because sometimes the risk is worth the benefits that you're going to get, right?
Right. Right.
So everybody has their own path that they need to take. So it can be for everybody, but it's not always for everybody. The way that psychedelics help people heal is that they bring you into a really deep place of healing. What I mean by that is in our brains, we usually have like a few things going on at a time.
Right.
And we have what's called the default mode network, which is our personality, right? That's kind of
Okay.
who we are at any given moment. What psychedelics do is they turn that off quite a bit. So
Yes.
you get
Yep.
what we call ego death. So you aren't you anymore. You are part of everything. And your whole brain starts to just connect in places that it never connected with before. And you become like, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Limitless, but they talk about how the main character, Scarlett Johansson's brain, or was that Lucy? That's Lucy.
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson's brain just everything is working all together at once. That's what psychedelics do.
Yeah, I think
You're
that's Bradley
almost
Cooper.
Limitless is Bradley Cooper. Yes, you're
Yes. Yeah.
correct.
It was a good movie.
Yeah. But yeah, so your whole brain connects in ways that it's never connected before, in ways that it's like, I don't know if I should be connecting to all of these things.
Right.
But it allows you to come into your body and into places that you would never find yourself in a normal situation. You can go
Yes.
into very, very deep, dark places in yourself, but feel safe to be there. And I think that is the big change and the big catalyst that psychedelics bring, especially when you're doing like a macro dose, is you
Hmm.
come to these things that maybe you were pushing away, maybe you were afraid to think about or afraid to experience in a safe way that doesn't feel too overwhelming. And then after your experience, up to like 30 or more days, they're saying probably now up to 6 weeks, your brain is like it was when you were a teenager. You have so
Really?
much neuroplasticity that you can make changes so easily. Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. I didn't know that. That is
Yeah.
fascinating. And what an amazing side effect. Like to reinstate neuroplasticity, like when you were a teenager. Holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah, it opens they call it a critical period, right? So when you're a small child, you have a critical period where your brain's just a sponge. And
Right.
then when you're an adolescent, you have a critical period where you are making new connections and then pulling away the old connections that aren't useful anymore. And it's a
Right.
slow process. In when you're with psychedelics after your macro dose, that up to 6 weeks is like that adolescent part where you can really make positive changes and let go of those things that aren't serving you anymore in a way like literally in your brain you're making new pathways.
Wow. So it can facilitate, like, let's say you were trying to rewire your brain and trying to build the new neural pathways, like form the pathways of gratitude, like a lot of my listeners work on
Yep.
is building new neural pathways of gratitude because your brain can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. Your brain can't be depressed and grateful at the same time. So if you build the gratitude neural pathways, this is like an assistance, like a leg up. Like, here, we'll help you build these much more efficiently.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Or hypervigilance, right? So
Yes.
say you're
PTSD.
feeling right? Hypervigilant. Even if you don't have a PTSD diagnosis and you
You
feel
just feel
like
hyper vigilant.
you have to know where the exits are, or, whatever it is that you're anxious about all the time, that's a really ingrained behavior, right? A really
Yes.
ingrained automatic response that you can change pretty easily after a psychedelic experience. If you do the integration work, right? If you go into
Right.
the experience and you do your trip and you have all this amazing stuff, and then you don't do anything different,
Yeah.
then it's going to be a good trip that you'll remember, and that'll be probably about it.
Right. But you're not changing anything on the other end of it. Yep.
You're not
That makes
taking advantage of that neuroplasticity.
exactly. Wow. So what is the best way to take advantage of that? Is that to work with an integration healer or is there another way?
I would suggest, especially when you're talking about, some of the more hallucinogenic substances like psilocybin, like LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, mescaline to a certain extent, that when you are in the trip, that you have somebody who feels safe there with you.
Okay.
It's probably better to have somebody to help you facilitate. A lot of people have been in the psychedelic space say, let's be non-directive, just let them have their experience. Sometimes I think we need to be a little more directive when people are going through really hard things and help them stay with it, right?
Yeah.
Rather than run away from it, which is a more directive approach, but it's not like I'm not a drill sergeant, but I think that can be really helpful for those substances. And then afterward, it's difficult to mirror yourself,
Yes.
right? And so understanding what happened in that trip and really digging into the deeper meanings and the deeper patterns can be difficult without somebody to help you. That's not to say that it's impossible to do it on your own. I think we all have the innate capacity to move towards wholeness and towards well-being. I also know that healing is relational and we are neurobiologically wired to be with other people and we're social creatures. So it's always
Yes.
easier to do with somebody else.
Thank you for saying that because it just further substantiates what I have said in my podcast. I'm like, I say this and this and this. People are like, yeah, but what does she know? Like, then I have guests like experts such as yourself come on that reaffirm and validate. And I'm like, oh yeah, she does know shit. Okay, cool. Thanks.
It's
So that
always
just
good to
makes
be
me happy.
validated.
Right? Like I validation is one of the things that I learned later in therapy because in therapy I started just getting anger out in the initial stages of
Mm-hmm.
therapy, but learned about validation later, especially self-validation, validating my emotions, the DBT skills of, allow, acknowledge, allow, understand, and I'm like, oh, validating my own feelings is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's so helpful and it's just it's revolutionary. That's a good descriptor. It's
There you go.
revolutionary. So I know you're not trained certified as a somatic healing practitioner, but can you tell the listeners a little bit about what that means and what somatic healing is?
It's a modality of somatic healing. It's not technically a therapy. They train coaches and they train other people in this. So
Sure.
it's not just therapists. But I haven't gone through the formal, like paid the $10,000 for the
Oh
training.
gosh, that's a
Yeah.
bit much.
But when I was in my master's program and for a year and a half after, I worked with a somatic experiencing master practitioner and basically did an apprenticeship with her
Hmm.
in all of those techniques. And what somatic experiencing is mostly about is working through your trauma rather than talking about it and trying to process it verbally through narrative, you're processing it through your body. So
Yes.
instead of talking about what happened to you, you're going to think about what's coming up for you right now that's a problem. So maybe you're having that hypervigilance. Doesn't matter why. What matters is that you're feeling that. And then you move it into your body. You feel the sensations of the hypervigilance. Maybe you want to move. And Peter Levine developed this based on his research into the nervous system and zoology, really. He
Hmm.
noticed that animals, when they have a traumatic experience,
Oh yeah.
when they have a traumatic experience, they go into this really, really hyper aroused state. And then to come back down, they move. So they shake or they yawn or they groom each other. They do something that's movement body based
Yeah, a lot of shaking.
to release all of that pent up nervous, scary energy. So that's a lot what a somatic experiencing is about, is finding that, okay, I feel the nervousness here. What does my body want to do with that? And then just let your body do what it wants to do with that and let it release. Which, I mean, when you look
Yes.
at yoga, it's very similar.
Yes, I read a Peter Levine book recently, and he talked about that in the initial part of the book. He talked about a trauma that he went through. It was a physical accident, and it was revolutionary. I mean, I've heard of somatic healing and that, but
Mhm.
I've never heard of like allow your body to shake and how it's so bad when medics like hold people down and don't or they drug people in the hospital and they don't let them shake and they don't let them physically,
Mhm.
violently move. And it's like that's so good for the body to
Yes,
physically release that energy. Yeah, and so many medical practitioners are just not aware of that.
right. Yeah, because it's scary.
Yes, yeah, because it looks scary and it looks like you're maybe having a grand mal seizure or something, and it's really
Hmm.
not. You're just really expelling that energy
Hmm.
from the adrenaline and everything that's gone through your body.
Exactly.
So, yes, thank you. What
Mhm.
can you give our listeners an example of what a healing experience would look like when working with you?
Well, that would depend on whether you're coming to me for a macrodose or a microdose, because they're similar but a little bit different.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's
So,
say macrodose for the sake of argument.
okay, so for a macrodose, what it would look like with me is that we would have, for the most part, I have kind of a program that I've laid out that isn't going to be super long and super expensive, but gets everything in that needs to get in. So that's how I've designed it. We do 4 preparation sessions. And what we do in those sessions is I go through that contraindications list with you. We talk about your goals, what substances might be best for your goals, and we do a really thorough risk benefit analysis. It's always up to you in the end what you want to do, but I want to make sure that everybody understands these are the risks, these are the benefits. You need to decide where that balance comes out for you, right?
Right. Yeah, you're the adult. You need to make a decision about your mental health and your physical health.
And there are times when I will tell people, please don't use LSD, right? Or please don't use MDMA because it's going to hurt you.
Right.
For the most part, those risks usually are something that you just need to balance.
Right.
Then we talk about intentions. And intentions are different from goals, right?
Yes. Yes.
Goals are very outcome oriented. You can't be that way with psychedelics. Psychedelics have a mind of their own.
Oh yeah.
If you go in with like a very specific outcome in mind, you're probably not going to get it and you're going to be disappointed. So instead, we work on intentions, which are, I was just watching a documentary about this. One of the intentions was, how can I treat myself more like a cat? Because she loved her cats so much, but she hated herself, right? So
Oh
how can I
no.
treat myself more like a cat?
More
Is
like
a
one of
great
her
intention.
cats too. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Or, if you're talking about your job and your goal is to, be less stressed at your job. How can I feel more stable and confident? There you go.
Yeah.
That's going to help in your job, but it's not a very narrow outcome focused goal. We'll then move into figuring out your setting, which is your mindset going into the trip and in the trip, and the setting, which is the environment that you're in, including the people around you. Because I do not facilitate psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, any of those longer, more intense journeys because I do most of my stuff online. When I do facilitate those, it's in person here in Belgium, but that isn't
Right.
most of my customers. So you need to have, if I'm not there, you need to have somebody there that is going to be able to follow the plan that we've laid out, going to feel safe if something unsafe happens, and is going to be able to be there with you and just hold space.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to come up with a plan for if something scary happens. So we've created this space that's going to be really, really safe. Nothing around you is going to feel unsafe, just in case something unsafe comes up for you. Everybody's going to
Sure.
be safe around you. But if something unsafe happens, you need to have the tools and the resources to be able to bring yourself kind of back out of that. So that's going to look like some breath work. That's probably going to look like having a plan for some sort of safe object that, if something starts to be really scary, you can grab onto that and know that that's safe. That might be your safe person, right? So it's going to be a whole plan to make sure that your trip goes as well as it possibly can. Psychedelics have a mind of their own. So things are going to go wonky and I'm never going to be able to tell you what you're going to experience, right?
Right, because you don't know how, I mean, everybody's brain is different.
Mm-hmm. Everybody has a unique experience with the medicine, and it doesn't matter if you take the same medicine as somebody else, what I experience and what you experience, even if we're in, a retreat or a ceremony right next to each other, it's going to be completely different.
Yes.
It's just about making sure that, especially if you're doing a solo journey, you're doing it in a way that allows for those therapeutic things to come up. Because if you don't feel safe, you don't have safe things around you, you're going to block that. And
Yeah.
it's difficult to do with like LSD and psilocybin, but it can happen. People have blocked those things and then they don't have a beneficial trip.
And they're like, hey, this just felt weird and I didn't like it or
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel anything and this is useless. Well, no, you just didn't have the right environment.
Not enough preparation. So then we move, after you have your trip, we move into the integration phase, which for me is three sort of phases. It's processing, so talking about what happened, making meaning out of what happened during your trip, and then connecting that back to your intention. Okay, so
Right.
these things happened during your trip. This is the meaning that you're getting out of that. How do we connect that back to your intention that you went in with? And then creating those new changes and practices in your life to take advantage of all of that neuroplasticity that you have going for
Yes.
you so that you can start to move toward that intention.
What do you see the most success with as it relates to trauma healing and your profession?
I think really and truly it is more of those somatic therapies and interventions. We have become so divorced in our Western capitalist world from our bodies, other
Yes.
than when they're sick, right? But even in the US, when people are sick, they just push it away unless it's
Oh
really,
yeah.
really, really bad,
Yeah.
right? Because people can't
Or you have
afford
a
it.
broken bone or something. Oh yeah, it's so
Right.
expensive.
Right. So we're like, okay, I'm sick, but I have to go to work or I have to do this. So I'm just going to try and ignore it. And that over time just completely pushes down any sort of interoception, any sort of connection that we have with our body and
Yes.
how to listen to it. So
Yes.
anything that can bring you back into your body is going to be helpful.
That was such a comprehensive explanation. It was perfect. Thank you. Do you feel that travel has helped in your healing process and or your clients?
Yes. So travel for me has been a huge part of my healing process and coming back to really who I am and my authentic, self, partially because it got me out of the US. I've been living, like I
Yes.
said, overseas for 9 years now.
Yeah, can you show me how
And
I can do that? I'm like kidding. I'm
oh,
not really kidding.
so just being able to move overseas, my partner had a stable job. I found a stable job, and we weren't in poverty anymore. Literally, like
Yeah.
that was a huge part of me being able to reconnect with myself and where I wanted to be and having less of those reactive moments where I knew it was coming from old stuff, past stuff, where I was still in survival mode.
Right.
So that for me has been extremely a huge gift for me, even though now my partner is a student again and I'm starting a business. So, but even now, it feels different than it did when I was in the States. It's a completely different animal, even though
Yeah.
we're in a similar, not similar. I am no longer making a lot of money the way I was.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're also probably a lot happier,
Yes, much happier. I think other than moving to a different country or different
which
countries,
is not always an option.
exactly. Just going out and talking with different people and learning different perspectives. I mean, it doesn't even have to be that far away from home. I grew up in Wyoming, and just going a state down to Colorado, it's a completely different mindset. They're completely different culture, right? So it doesn't have to be another country, but just having that change in perspective and practicing that, I think is really
Yes.
important because the more you can practice shifting perspectives and empathy and really integrating that, the easier it's going to be for you to keep doing that, even in your healing process. Again, that neuroplasticity, the more you practice it, the easier it gets.
Absolutely. What do you suggest for shame resilience for yourself and or your clients?
Self compassion.
I love that.
Yeah, it's probably the most important preventative practice that I do because again with complex trauma, childhood trauma, comes with a lot of shame,
Oh yeah.
especially because your brain, when you're a kid, you don't understand that the shit that's going on around you isn't your fault. You think it's happening
Yes.
because of you. And
Yes.
so getting to a point where you don't feel that anymore, a lot of these other practices that we've talked about, the psychedelics, the yoga, all of that is really good to get you to a point where you can then start practicing self-compassion. Because what I've realized is that, yeah, I can start somebody practicing self-compassion, but they're not going to feel it until they've done, some of the deeper work. So it's just going to be a cognitive exercise that they're doing rather
Yes.
than a really deep felt sense, I care about myself, I'm compassionate with myself. But it's an amazing preventative practice. So when I was working in international schools, I would do this with kids all the time with my students because it's one of the things that can really help if and when something traumatic happens to you,
Hmm.
you have that resilience of, I already love myself. I already care about myself. So I know that this wasn't my fault. And so it really
Yes.
shields you from that toxic shame of trauma and adversity. And my go-to self-compassion practice is metta meditation, which is a loving kindness
Oh,
meditation, which
I
is
like
from
that.
Buddhism. And the reason that I really like it is because it's like a stepped process. So you start with sending self-compassion, well, not compassion and love and kindness to somebody that you already love.
Okay.
And once you are
Easier
able
for some.
to feel that, I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's hard to feel again because we're so disconnected. It's really hard to
Yes.
feel that and embody that. You know that you love somebody, but do you feel it?
Right.
Right. So as soon as you're able to feel that, like really feel it and embody it, then you go to somebody neutral, the cashier at Starbucks or whatever. And then once you're able to feel that, you move on to somebody who is difficult to have compassion for,
Oh, I like that.
right? And that usually is a longer step, usually takes some time to really actually, I mean, it's one thing to be like, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be at peace. I can say that all I want to somebody that I don't like, but I have to feel it before I can move on. And then the last step, which is the hardest step for most people, is you do it for yourself.
Yes. Yeah. It's taken me a lot of practice and a lot of work to get to really wholehearted self-compassion. And now I'm not no expert, let me be clear. Now I try to talk to myself like somebody that I love. And I've gotten a
Yes.
lot better about it. And it's easier now that I've
Mhm.
practiced it for years.
Yep,
But the first time I tried this, I was like, nope, can't do that. I would have loved
exactly.
the stepping system had I known that that existed.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult because I think a lot of like the recorded and guided meditations for loving kindness tend to do them all at the same time. And I
Yeah,
don't think that that's the intended, I mean, I know that that's not the intended way to go about it. So it can be difficult to find a good meditation for that. But I think there are a couple out there.
yes.
But it's really, yeah, it's an important practice. And it's one of those things that I definitely try and have everybody use after a macrodose and definitely during microdosing is start that practice because if you start it now and you can feel it now, that's going to be something that's going to prevent, more of this stuff from happening.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've read it personally, but I got a lot of success after reading Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, which
Oh, wow.
super healing, super helpful. And it was just like a step-by-step guide. And I mean, it's not like a pamphlet or anything, it's a book, but it was also very relational. Like, hey,
Hmm.
I know you're beating yourself up. Just try, an ounce of self-compassion. Just try, saying one less nasty thing to yourself. And that's how we
Hmm.
start, like microdosing for self-compassion.
My loving kindness book is called Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon
Oh,
Salzberg.
I will put that on my list immediately because I
It's
am all about the
beautiful.
self-compassion. And shame resilience is just so important. Like, I mean, we all find ourselves in shame. We're all human beings. You're gonna be in shame, whether you're struggling with addiction or, I mean, there's addiction comes in so many forms, right? Addiction is my
Yeah.
perfect example because you can have food addiction, you can have porn addiction, you can have sex addiction, you can have alcohol addiction, you can have gambling addiction. There's so many addictions. And
Yeah.
addiction is just rooted in shame.
Exactly.
And if you work on the shame and if you work on caring about yourself more and loving yourself more, the addiction is much easier to battle, deal with, get rid of or whatever. What
Mhm.
if you want to deal with your addiction. Like
Yep.
I've had a food addiction for a long time because that's was my coping mechanism as a child. Because as a child, you don't have a lot of access to the illicit substances.
Yes.
Had I had
Yep.
access, who knows? I probably wouldn't even be alive today. But anyway, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Yeah. Shame and pain,
Shame
the
and pain.
underlying for addiction.
Yes, shame and pain. What do you wish more people knew when it comes to healing their own trauma, especially with all of your education, background, and experience?
I really think it's just that healing is relational, right? We like we evolved to be a cooperative species. We need to be with other people to
Yes.
survive.
Yes.
We need other people. I mean, Dan Siegel, who developed interpersonal neurobiology,
Hmm.
he has done research that says that you can't even self-reflect until you have had a relationship that's safe and supportive with somebody else. So we can't
Yes.
even know about ourselves until we've known about somebody else,
Because you need a
right?
safe person.
Yes. So while there is a lot of stuff that you can do on your own, it's going to only get you so far, and it's going to be a lot slower, right? Like, had I found somebody when I was 16, right, to help me work through whatever it was that I needed to work through in that moment, I had somebody there that was safe and supportive and knew how to deal with trauma. My yoga probably wouldn't have taken me 15 years to resolve whatever it was that it had resolved by that point, right? It would have been
Right.
faster. And I think that's what's so powerful about psychedelics too, is that yeah, I can do 10 years of yoga, but I can do 2 or 3 psilocybin trips and get that same amount of healing as long as I'm also doing the work afterwards, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which is
But it's
where
much,
you come in
yes,
and help
it, it's
people with the
it's so
journey.
much quicker, and in a lot of ways it's more accessible. I mean, I'm trying to just think about how much money I've probably spent at yoga studios
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
over the
Or
last 20 years. And
right. Or on things that make yourself feel better, or on retail
mhm,
therapy, or on drugs, or on alcohol, or on or take your pick. Like how much money do we throw away on these things that are just trying to numb the pain that we feel from shame or from childhood trauma or from whatever the root is, even if you don't know
mhm,
the root. Like if you're numbing, you've got pain. And
yep,
we're all human beings, and so we all numb to some degree. It's a
right.
matter of with what and how expensive is that?
Yeah. And I'm not at all saying that, thousands of dollars to do treatment is, accessible for everybody. It's
Right.
just, and I wish it could be cheaper. I honestly wish that we didn't live in a capitalist society and I could just be the wise woman in the cottage at the edge of the woods and just, help people with psychedelic trips. But
Yes.
it it is important to have accessible care, but things like psilocybin are much more accessible than things like antidepressants, right?
Absolutely. And probably a lot safer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research coming out now that withdrawing from antidepressants can make you worse. Like can make
Yes.
your mental health worse because it's thrown off so much stuff in your brain and your nervous system.
Right.
Um,
Your
and
serotonin receptors are all fucked up now.
because things have been blocked and things have been, shifted, your neural pathways are completely shifted in a different direction.
Yeah.
And then when all of that stuff kind of floods back in, you don't have the pathways that you used to have to deal with that, right? Even if it may have been unhealthy. So now you have
Right.
to come up with all this other chaotic behavior just, just to feel okay. And for
Yes.
some people, antidepressants are really helpful. Not as many as we've been told. They don't, even if it is helpful for them, they don't get the education that these things can be hard to withdraw from, that you have withdrawals, that you have these side effects from withdrawals. So I think it's just really a disservice to people to be pushing things that don't have, that you're not giving them informed consent on, and that they don't realize maybe aren't as helpful as people are saying.
Yeah. And doctors are never discussing, oh, this is going to suck if you ever try to come off of this,
Yep.
or this is what it's going to do to your brain if you ever try to come off of this, or whatever. Yes.
That's just why I really, really focus on making sure that people understand the risks and the benefits of psychedelics, because they're very, very low risk. Like if you if you look at psilocybin and LSD and cannabis and put those, just with deaths from Tylenol, I
Right.
mean, there aren't any deaths really from psilocybin. I don't think I've seen any in the data. There are risks, but they're so very low that it's almost negligible. But I am going to tell you about those risks because I want you to understand what you're getting into, and I want you to have an informed decision that you can make for yourself so that you're not at my mercy.
Of course. Of course. Well, and that's the responsible and ethical thing to do. I know we could chat forever about this because I
Yes,
think
okay.
this is so fascinating, but I'm gonna end the show with a quick quiz question round. These are mostly personal, but there are some random questions in there. What piece of art, movie, show, or any creative work was incredibly influential for you and why?
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Love it.
And
Love it.
yes, I think it was a glimpse into the society that we could have if we were
Oh,
focused more on people than profit and money. And
yes.
that was something that it's something that I'm passionate about, and it gives me something to imagine and to work towards and to strive towards. But also, there were so many just episodes that dealt with really heavy ethical issues.
Yeah.
And they dealt with them in a very straightforward, in your face way. And I think that is probably why I feel so strongly about ethics and so strongly about making sure that, people are informed and that we do the right
Yes.
thing because I grew up watching that.
I grew up watching that too. I love that. I never even thought about it in that perspective, but that lens. I love that. Now I'm gonna have to rewatch that,
It's like
which
every 2 or 3
makes me
years
happy.
for me.
What do you do to decompress?
Oh, I do lots of things, but I think yoga is probably my go-to. I
Hmm.
like snuggling with my cats. I do fiber art, so I weave and I sew, and sometimes that's decompressing and sometimes that's frustrating. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Been there. Some of my hobbies are like that. It's like a painting can be really frustrating or can be decompressing,
Yep.
depending on what I'm using it for. If I'm using it for art therapy and I'm just, not caring about what I'm making versus I'm trying to be detailed and paint this, beautiful picture, whatever.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you. What's the last self-improvement or trauma book or show you read or saw and highly recommend?
I am almost done reading a book called Psychedelic Cannabis by Daniel McQueen. They've done research that there are a couple of cannabinoids that
Okay.
work together to hit the serotonin receptors very similarly to psilocybin and LSD. So if
Okay.
you use it intentionally, it can be a psychedelic. But because of all of the other things going on in cannabis, you also have a lot more control over it. So it's really easy to have a cannabis trip that you kind of control and that's really safe because if you want to get out of it, you can just get out of it and you're done. And so it's a
I
book
love that.
about how to do that and how to do it on your own. So it's really great.
What movie or book are you currently recommending to anybody who will listen? And that can be for any reason, just because it's something you personally like.
I always recommend Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness, but I also think The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate.
Oh, that's such a good one. I have read that one. That is such a good one. What is at the top of your travel bucket or wish list?
I think right now it's visiting Stonehenge at midsummer
Ooh, why Midsummer?
because it's a festival, so they let you into the stones and you get to
Oh,
watch the sunrise through the stones, and it's, a whole mystical experience.
ooh, I love that. I love that. That is going to go on my list now as well. Not like it's difficult to add things that I want to go do or places I want to travel to. I've been to
No, I've got
England
a
multiple times, but I've never been to Stonehenge.
oh, it's beautiful. I've been, but I just haven't gone at midsummer. So
What is the most useful travel purchase or item or items that you've ever made?
right after we moved overseas, we bought these 40-liter carry-on size travel backpacks.
Mm.
And for most of our trips, that's all we take. It
Ooh,
makes it so much easier to get through like security, to get, wherever it is you need to go. You've got all of your stuff on your back if you need to, run to a different hotel for some reason. Best purchase we ever made.
what is for dinner tonight? The foodie in me needs to know.
I'm having quinoa pilaf with chicken.
So healthy. I love that. Okay, what's the best travel story you have or have ever heard if you don't have one?
Our first move overseas, we moved to Jordan, so a Middle Eastern country, and we brought back a whole bunch of spices the first time we came back.
Of course, as one
And
does in the
we
Middle East.
of course. And we got stopped. I think we had two stops to get back to Wyoming. And at each airport, we got pulled aside and they were just like, what the? Because we had sumac, which is kind of purpley colored.
Oh,
They're like,
okay.
what the fuck is that? Well, I've never seen this before. Why do you have a fucking kilo of whatever the fuck this is? For gifts. It's a spice.
And it looks cool. Oh my gosh. Okay. So they were like, what is this questionable powdery purple substance with you, ma'am?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
What couple of songs would best describe you to somebody who doesn't know you?
The first one would have to be You Call Me a Bitch Like It's a Bad Thing by Hailstorm. I Believe in a Thing Called Love by The Darkness.
And last but certainly not least, perhaps most importantly, what advice would you give for someone struggling with not being able to find a therapist?
It's tough. It's really tough because, like we talked about, healing is relational. And I mean, this is the one thing that I think doesn't suffer from the replicability crisis in psychology. There's a lot of studies and things that we're going back and realizing that, maybe that wasn't true.
Right.
The results of that study, because we can't replicate it. It can't be done again. This one, we know that the therapeutic relationship or the healing relationship is the number one reason for positive outcomes in therapy.
Right.
So finding somebody you vibe with is the most important thing, which means it's easier if you can find people who give you a free consult. It's not very popular now, which is unfortunate. I think it's something that's important and people should do. But I would start there, try and find people that have a free consult. And if you vibe with them, great. If you don't, get the fuck out.
Thank you.
There are a lot of good directories. I like Therapy Den a lot better than Psych Today. That you can, and you can filter based on your insurance and things like that.
Therapy Den, like a bear's den?
Like a den.
Okay, perfect.
And then if you can't find somebody who takes your insurance that you vibe with, there is in the United States a service called Open Path Collective, and you pay a one-time fee, and then you get reduced price. I think it's like $20 to $60 per session therapy, and there's a bunch of therapists on there that
that's not bad.
Yeah, that have available slots. So that's easier than maybe paying, $125 for a first session and being like, I hate you. So
yeah,
better to pay $40.
How can our listeners get a hold of you if they want to work with you or if they just have questions?
I am on LinkedIn a lot. You can also find me on Instagram and my website, which is innerevolutioncoach.com. And my email is on there. You can always feel free to email me, message me. I'm here to help.
Thank you so much for being here and taking the time today on the You Make It Happen podcast. I hope to have you back on again someday. This is just revelational and so enlightening, and I hope our listeners enjoyed this as much as I did.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me geek out and geeking out with me. That was great.
Oh, I'm here for it. Well, that was so enlightening, and I can't tell you how much I learned and appreciated having Liz on the podcast. If you want to get a hold of her, her contact information is reiterated in the show notes. I try to include travel tips in every episode, but it's a guest episode and it runs a little long, and so you're going to have to stay tuned for the next one. Also, thank you for your patience during the holidays. You may have noticed there was no episode during the week of Thanksgiving, and there'll be no episode during the week of Christmas. I do take time off for myself during the holidays as well as self-care. And you guys know enough about me to know one of the reasons I do that is because I don't have a lot of immediate family and I need extra time for self-care during the holidays. As always, don't forget, work your shit out, not on other people, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you so much for listening.